in New York for us. I want to bring in Marwan Bishara. He's Al Jazeera's senior political analyst. He's joining us now from Doha. Marwan, it seems as though in the last hour or so we may have a deal on a ceasefire in Gaza. But again, we should reiterate, and you have been telling us this over the last few hours as we've been talking, we have been here before. We even had a ceasefire, a short-term ceasefire, about 15 or certainly 13 months ago, which then ended. We have to be very cautious about being too optimistic about what is happening.
We need to be careful about being optimistic about the implementation of this ceasefire, because it's clearly a very complicated process that's going to be happening simultaneously on a number of fronts: the humanitarian, the military, the political, the exchange of prisoners and captives, and the movement of people back to their destroyed homes, and the distribution of humanitarian aid and medical aid and all the rest of it. So it's going to be a very, very complicated process, and I think the Israelis ensured that it would be a complicated process so that we'll be in control of it. Now, we need to remind ourselves of a number of things that are key here in order to understand how we're moving forward. Because we are dealing with an Israeli leader, let's remind ourselves, who's a war criminal. He's been indicted, for all practical matter, by the International Criminal Court. He is sought after by the prosecutor of the International Court for war crimes. So we're talking about a war criminal, surrounded by fascists and fanatics who have spearheaded this genocide. Again, Israel is basically, for all practical matter, indicted on genocide, and that's why the court accepted the case, to look into it in the months and years to come. So we have a genocidal criminal government in Israel that's going to be leading this process moving forward. Does this give you confidence? Well, it certainly does not give me confidence that they are in any way serious about ceasefire, they're in any way serious about the well-being of the people in Gaza, or for that matter, in terms of the second and the third phase of this ceasefire, about the future of Palestine, Israel, and peace in the Middle East. Clearly, they are not to be trusted. And here, I'm reminded by one statement by one American president, Donald Reagan, when he said, "Trust but verify." Well, in this case, don't trust and verify. We cannot trust the Israelis. They are cutthroat politicians. They are certainly not at all feeling bad about what they've done. In fact, they can still consider themselves the most holy of all holies and the most and the best professional army in the world, even though now we're talking about tens of thousands of Palestinians killed in Gaza and hundreds, perhaps more, of thousands of casualties. In the midst of all of that, if I might just add one quick remark, just tell you about the depth and the horror of what is to come. At one point, Rob, we're going to be talking about clearing the debris. And we're talking about millions of tons of debris. That's going to take years upon years. Now, consider the fact that there's an estimated 10 to 11,000 missing people in the debris. So clearing the debris, knowing that there's going to be some 10,000 Palestinian dead in it, with their families and their loved ones looking still for them. This is the kind of challenge we're talking about moving forward in Gaza. This is aside from everything I just mentioned earlier about taking care of the living. And none of that is on Israel's agenda. As Trump just tweeted, it's about the hostages for them. It's apparently about the hostages for the American administration. It's not about the 2 million Palestinians who have been living genocide for 16 months. It's certainly not about peace in the Middle East, and it's not about a two-state solution. It's about some 33 people who would be released in the next 42 days, 3 or 4 a week. That's what they're focused on, not about everything else we've been covering, the genocide in Gaza.
And one of the conditions that has been mentioned as part of this ceasefire agreement, at least according to the details that we were getting initially from Associated Press, because they leaked them, but now I understand Reuters has come out with some as well, will be involving the delivery of humanitarian aid. But to come back to your point about looking after the people in Gaza and where they go from here, even trying, one would imagine, to get that aid into Gaza, given the fact that Israel is going to continue to control the land and sea borders around Gaza, is not going to be an easy process. The people in Gaza, from what you're saying, will not necessarily get the help that they desperately need as fast as they need it.
And that is a recipe for disaster. That is a recipe for disaster. Because the 2 million Palestinians who have been living under this horrific bombardment and killing and slaughter and destruction and death the past 16 months are expecting now that there's a ceasefire for some respite. But the Israelis are not going to allow this. They are sadistic, they are racist, and they're going to make sure that the Palestinians don't enjoy a day of joy for being free of bombings and fear and so on and so forth. So yes, it's going to be on two levels. One, which is allowing the aid in, and second, the distribution of aid. Now, having said that, Rob, I think it's important to mention some of the positives, if one can say that, is that, as we've heard in the past hour, this is the same deal, basically, that was agreed upon in May by the Palestinians, by Hamas, rejected by Israel. And this deal does insist on Israel withdrawal from, for example, the Philadelphia Inquirer, or from Netzarim, or from the eastern part of Gaza. Withdrawals, and not taking on any major piece of land from Gaza, and allowing the Palestinians to move back north. The Israelis rejected all of that the past 8 months, allowing for tens of thousands of more people to be killed or injured. But now Netanyahu is forced to accept that which he rejected 8 months ago, allowing for the war to continue 8 extra months and subjecting the Palestinians to an incredible suffering. This goes to the heart of the matter of how criminal this prime minister is, and why the International Criminal Court thinks so, not that I think so. The International Criminal Court thinks that he and his lieutenants deliberately starved the people in Gaza. It had nothing to do with the war against Hamas. Not directly, that's for sure. He simply installed a policy to starve the people in Gaza by cutting aid coming in, and of course, as usual, blaming the Palestinians for it, as if the Palestinians have vested interest in starving their people. But be that as it may, now we have a deal that was basically more or less the deal that was reached back in June and later on in August, that Netanyahu had to accept because Trump basically told him so, because he didn't want more of the same as he's inaugurated in January 20th. That does not mean that from here on, the path is going to be paved with good intentions. Anything but. I don't trust the next coming administration of Christian Zionists. I don't trust the fanatic Zionist government in Israel that's basically indicted on war crimes. And I don't trust those in the various surroundings and elsewhere in how they want to contribute to the rebuilding of Gaza and for supporting a two-state solution. All of that remains, at best, a guessing game, at best. And it certainly leaves a lot of room for skepticisms about intentions and about will to move this thing forward in order to, yes, on the one hand, prevent another October 7th from happening by ending the occupation, ending the suffering, and reaching security through peace, rather than the usual Israeli grinding words nonstop about how their security comes first and everything else be damned.
Marwan Bishara, Al Jazeera's senior political analyst, thank you very much indeed.